Good afternoon and welcome to 3 o'clock with SOC. Give me a second while I welcome our Spanish-speaking neighbors. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos o bienvenidos otra vez a 3 en punto con SOC. Si quieren acceso al programa en español, por favor marcan el número 426-436-6200. El número aparece en pantalla. Cuando contestan la llamada, por favor, compartan el clave o el contraseña que empieza con el número 6, que es 627-682. My name is Tammy Rivera. I'm the Executive Director and Lead Organizer for Southside Organizing Center, SOC, or SOC for our old schoolers out there. Please know there are a whole group of people making these community online forums possible. Our production host, Marisol Diaz, who's our communications manager, Edith Chavez, our forum coordinator, Gabe Charles, our civic engagement manager, who's always ready to do backup, and a whole slew of our staff is here for you, as we always are. And you can reach us in all the ways that you normally do, except in person for the time being. So please know that you can call us at 414-672-8090. You can email us at soc@socmilwaukee.org, and you can visit our webpage at www.socmilwaukee.org, and we have an entire page dedicated to information, resources, and technology in regards to the coronavirus, and it gets updated frequently to keep you as up to date as we are. Today, we have an incredible selection of panelists that are going to help us navigate the decision that was made yesterday by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And then I want to give you a heads up of what's you can expect in the next couple of days here. And so we're coordinating with Mayor Tom Barrett to be on tomorrow or Monday, early next week. We will have a special edition of the forum dedicated to the Benedict Center Sisters program, talking about the critical issue of the diversion program for women involved in street prostitution. And next week, we're going to have the ACLU with us to also discuss this and other critical issues. So you want to be with us. We're going to have some great information for you at a time that can be very confusing. Before we get our program started, I want to make sure that you all know we're very committed to ensuring residents have a voice, that you have a vote, and that you have a vehicle to organize. And this is one of the ways that we're making that happen, ensuring that since we can't be with you like we usually are, person to person in the community, that we're coming to you live on Facebook for the time being, and want to ensure your voice. And in order to do that, we're not always able to discuss certain topics or sign off on certain thoughts, but we do create the voice, the space for that. And so sometimes we have to allow the space and use a disclaimer like I'm about to do right now, which is that the views and the opinions shared today don't necessarily reflect those of SOC. With that, I want to make sure that you all know I'm going to introduce the panelists, but we want to encourage you to engage with our forum today. If you have questions, and I already have some, I have some resident leaders who text me questions, and we've been gathering them about what's taking place, please share them on the comments. I'll be checking back there and asking you to post your questions, post your concerns, so that we can do this together. With that being said, in case you haven't heard, the Wisconsin Supreme Court yesterday struck down Governor Evers' safer at home order. And then our mayor, Mayor Tom Barrett, reinforced that the city of Milwaukee is still abiding by safer at home. So what does this all mean? We're going to try to make sense of that together. And we have several legal and historian experts today to help us navigate those waters and to address your questions and concerns. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists today, great friends of SOC as well. State Representative Marisabel Cabrera is with us, and she was here previously. Hola, State Representative Cabrera, happy to have you with us. Judge Pedro Colon is with us once again as well. Hola, Pedro.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm a little tired, feeling all my ages, all my years. With us as well is Marquette University Law Professor Ed Falone.
Hola.
Hola, hola, Ed. And with us today is the chair of the County Human Rights Commission, who's also a professor at Marquette University, and he happens to be the director of their Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, Dr. Robert Smith.
Good afternoon, folks. Hola.
Hola, everyone. So grateful you all can be here. Also very grateful that you're all repeat partners here on our online forum. And I'm happy to report that we switched to a new software. So we shouldn't be having any of those problems that we had round one. We're learning on this curve of the digital. Oh, well, I'm glad you're in it with us. So we have the decision finally came through yesterday. And what I'd like to do is give each of you a couple of minutes to respond in general, maybe 3 minutes in general. And then let's dig into some details about what does that mean? What could possibly come in response to that, like, does this go to the U.S. Supreme Court like some of the other decisions? And then touch on the mayor's response and what could happen in response to that. And we're just here all together making the best estimates of what we know in law, history, and practice has been utilized or could be utilized. So I just want a disclaimer for everybody that we're just making it through with our best knowledge and experiences. Let's start with you, State Representative Cabrera. What were your initial thoughts to the decision yesterday by the Wisconsin Supreme Court to strike down Governor Evers' safer at home order?
Well, first of all, thank you again for inviting me to your forum. So my first response was, I'm not surprised. It was something that we all expected, at least the Democratic caucus was expecting the Supreme Court conservative judges to essentially rubber stamp what the Republican legislators were requesting. I am also, an attorney by profession before I became a state representative. So I did read the opinion, and the majority opinion goes through great lengths to rewrite the statutes and go beyond the scope of their authority as the judicial branch. And even the basic tenets of law of statutory interpretation was completely set aside because the plain language of the statutes that the governor and Secretary of Department of Health Services were relying on clearly states that she has the authority to issue the order that she did. And they just went through all sorts of mental gymnastics in order to achieve the decision that they wanted. And it's really weird because on the one hand, they say that the order is stricken in its entirety as unenforceable and unlawful, but then they have a little tiny footnote that says, except for the part that pertains to schools. So how can you say that the entire order is unlawful, but then you're allowing one part of it to move forward? That's completely in opposite of what they're trying to do. So what the results of that is that basically there is no statewide response at the current moment for addressing the coronavirus pandemic. And that still allows the local governments to proceed as they determine is necessary. And then it's sort of what we have: the federal government, then we have the state government, then we have county, city. And it's sort of how the federal government sort of punted the ball to the governors of each state.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like the state is punting it towards the lower level local government to fend for themselves and figure things out on their own. Lucky for the city of Milwaukee, our mayor actually had an order in place that did not have an expiration date, so we were still covered. But it was very confusing because the Republican legislators had not provided a plan B, and the Supreme Court did not provide any guidance whatsoever other than to say you don't have the authority to issue this order, but then they didn't explain what the law actually says does allow them to do. So that was the confusion with that, and why so many people yesterday didn't know, can we open, can we not open, what's the situation?
Thank you for those initial thoughts. Judge Colon, how about your initial thoughts?
You know, Tammy, I'm going to defer to Ed Falone because he has commented so thoroughly and articulate. He's been so articulate as to what the Supreme Court did constitutionally that I think it's better to hear from Ed, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. Ed, that puts you at front stage here. Give us your thoughts. We've been eagerly awaiting them.
Thank you for your gracious deferral, Judge Colon. So I think it's important to just step back and realize, decades ago, the state legislature passed a law entitled Communicable Disease, and it gave very broad authority to the Secretary of the Department of Health Services, who's Andrea Palm in this case. It gave very broad authority to whoever was the secretary of that department to issue orders in response to outbreaks of communicable disease. And they could be very wide-ranging, including the closing of schools, closing of churches, any place where the public would gather. And essentially what the Wisconsin Supreme Court did yesterday is 4 justices decided they didn't like that scheme. They didn't like the fact that the legislature had granted such broad authority in emergency situations such as this. And so they declared that this statute on communicable diseases was subjected to a different statute that treats it as a rule that has to go through a very formal procedural rulemaking process where members of the state legislature are involved and where it might take days, if not weeks, for any sort of order to come out. And in addition, they struck down the communicable disease statute's use in this case without any sort of a backup, as Representative Cabrera said. There was no exit plan. There was no fallback. It was basically to take statewide orders that had been issued that were uniform, that everyone knew very clearly what the rules were in terms of businesses that had to be closed, which businesses were essential and which were not, and public gatherings that were restricted, such as religious services. All of that uniformity and clarity disappeared as of yesterday. And now we're left with nothing statewide. And so you have local health departments, county, city, like the city of Milwaukee, Dane County, that are now stepping forward and coming out with their own safer at home orders, just for their limited jurisdiction. But of course, they're not uniform, they differ. And of course, they don't apply across the state. So people may find they work in one jurisdiction with one type of order, but they live in a different jurisdiction with a different type of order. And it can be very confusing. So what we see here is a court that on its own decided it didn't like a system of responding to communicable disease with a broad authority given to the Department of Health Services. And because they didn't like it, they decided it should be subjected to a burdensome and time-consuming rulemaking process, which now we have to get underway. And in the meantime, that it was better to have nothing at all instead of the safer at home order that applied statewide. It's a very embarrassing day for the state of Wisconsin. Certainly, this will go down as one of the worst decisions of the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Thank you for that initial response. Very loaded. I have some follow-up questions, but it's helpful to understand what maneuver was technically used to make the decision. Dr. Robert Smith, what is your initial response to the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, yet again, we have this very unfortunate outcome where it appears as though our Republican-controlled legislature, in cahoots with the conservative-leaning justices on the court, then want to advance an agenda that seeks to put more and more people's lives at risk. And there's all kinds of legal sophistry that can go into that others have talked about. But at the end of the day, on the ground, there are a lot of folks who are going to suffer because of this very unbelievable, unremarkable, in some cases, negligent and absurd and evil decision. We're going to have to answer for this for generations to come. We're going to have to, particularly as a historian, folks are going to have to try to make sense out of why, in this moment, we would have voted in person, why we will now have to outmaneuver our own legislature and our own state Supreme Court to be safer and to be healthier in the midst of a pandemic. This indeed, and I agree, this is a heinous decision and a heinous outcome, and it speaks to, as others have mentioned, the ways in which it's this legal gymnastics that has to go into these interpretations that don't make any real sense by the determinations of most legal minds. And so this is problematic beyond belief. And it again, and I thank you for inviting me, because it gets us back into this question of whether or not our government is protecting us. What is it that our government is doing, particularly those who have the authority and control to manage this moment with this pandemic, and they are continually failing us. And so I thank the folks that are here on the panel for the work you all are doing, because you all are giving us just a little bit of hope as citizens, because the folks who are advancing this agenda, not only is it scary, not only is it frustrating, but it's really unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Thank you for your initial responses. I want to invite our residents now to weigh in on the information they just heard. Folks, you've heard from several experts here. What are your thoughts in response to the initial reactions to the Supreme Court decision? There's a question here, Diana Becerra. Phone number for Spanish interpretation. Yes, we shared that earlier. I'll ask Marisol to put it back on the screen. We do simultaneous interpretation in Spanish at these forums. People call into a conference call every forum and can participate on Facebook Live and hear it in Spanish. There it is for you. Uriel, muy decepcionado con la decisión del tribunal. Very disappointed with the decision. Hola, Jerry. Hola. Lila makes a remark, yet the justices met from home for their decision.
Of course they did.
Well,
Yeah.
Tammy.
Go ahead, Judge
is,
Colon.
I did watch the arguments by the attorneys in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was most struck by those arguments, and I as a judge and somebody who practices law and has been a legislator, I really enjoyed the practice of law at its best. And I thought the attorneys behaved like the judges in this case, and the judges were very, very eagerly conflicted while these arguments were going on.
Yeah.
But one part of the argument that I want to mention was the part in which one of the justices compared regular folk were not like people who worked in meat packing plants.
Mm-hmm.
And it really hit home, not only because it's clearly, in my view, not a fair statement about how we interpret, even if it was a constitutional argument. The Article 1 of our state constitution is we all deserve the same respect. We all deserve the same dignity to pursue our happiness, right? And so when that comment was made, I thought back to all the people in the South Side. And every time I look at a cluster, and this is the South Side Organizing Committee, right? Mm. So every time I look at a cluster of COVID-19 cases, they're usually clustered around my neighborhood. And they're clustered around not only my neighborhood, but actually by people who make a living doing the things such as meat packing.
Mhm.
And so if the Supreme Court is ever going to do anything for anyone, specifically a judge who's trying to follow the law, what we need are consistent statements that actually, as I was alluded to before, help people be safe. It's not complicated.
Right.
And I thought the governor had some clear principles under which we could help people keep us fed, like we ask all the people at CERMAC, at El Rey, everywhere else, to work day in and day out, and not have the Wisconsin Supreme Court have a political battle over something which we deeply care about.
Right.
And those are sound constitutional pronouncements, either by the legislature through law or by the Supreme Court through its rationale. Let me just say one last thing. Not only was it, in my view, the arguments were disrespectful to the people that Marisabel serves and I serve and every elected official serves, but I also thought that after reading the decision, those were the arguments. Then I read the decision. And if it was a pizza, right, it would be a pizza where there would be half would be a pizza. The other one would be sort of a Subway sandwich. And in the ones that agreed with the pizza, they'd all have different things that they wanted on their pie, right? So each slice would represent something else. My point is, there was actually no concurrence in the agreement about how we were to proceed forward, which is what every good decision does, every sound decision. And we didn't have it. It was a failure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would just add as well, what we need is accountability in our leaders. And when you have the decisions centralized in the governor for this response, he's accountable. And the people know whether we're safe or we're not safe. The blame will lie or the credit will lie on the governor's shoulders and his Secretary of Health Services. But what the court's done is they've taken an action. They've eliminated the orders, the safer at home order. They're not accountable. I mean, they face the voters, in 10-year terms and a staggered basis. So they can't feel the wrath of the voters for what they did. And they give a big seat at the table to the leaders, the Republican leaders of the state legislature. Well, you know what? I'm not in Robin Voss's district. I can't vote for or against him. I'm not in Scott Fitzgerald's district. I can't vote for or against him. So they're not accountable to the people of the state either. And so it's really a shame, because one of the most important public health emergencies in the history of our state, and essentially we're asking, well, who's in charge? Who's accountable? And the answer is no one.
Right.
It is a shame. And one of the things that was apparent to me after the decision and then Mayor Barrett's announcement is our counties are adjacent to each other. So how do municipal and local governments make decisions when we're so close to each other and it's 5 minutes to cross a line? And so here's one of the questions, like that's all the political jockeying, but a pragmatic situation now, all those people, here's a question from Esperanza Gutierrez. So does this affect unemployment benefits? Because part of the qualifications were if your job is not functioning because of COVID. So does that mean now people who work in Waukesha or Sheboygan qualify for unemployment or don't? Or they live here, but they work there? Like, how is the state even going to implement some of the pragmatic things they have to under the silence of how to proceed? Who would like to respond to that question?
Well, I can try. It basically what ends up happening, and this is actually, to be frank, this is the outcome exactly what the Republicans wanted. It is actually what was put forward by the WMC in their proposal. They wanted a regional approach. They wanted, because they said, well, there's some places that don't have very many COVID cases, and there's some places that, like Milwaukee, that have a lot. So they thought that each place should have their own set of rules according to what the COVID infection rate is. And this is actually the plan that was presented to us in committee, in the State Affairs Committee by the WMC. And when asked, how do you expect to contain the virus within any particular region when people are mobile and going from one place to the next? And they didn't really have a response for that. They said people should, take it upon themselves and be responsible and do what they can to stay safe. And that if you're scared and you don't feel comfortable, then don't go to work. And then when asked, well, how does that impact their unemployment benefits? Yeah. Because I can say, I don't feel safe going to work. I don't want to go. But if the economy is open and there's no order saying that you have to stay home and that your employer has to stay closed, if your employer calls you to come to work, you no longer are eligible for unemployment benefits because you have a job to return to. You are choosing not to return.
Mm.
And what does that do? The other part of the question is, what does that do if you're a caretaker of somebody who's tested positive and they call you back to work now in those federal provisions and now without the safer at home?
You have to decide what's more important to you, your health or your job. That's what it comes down to. It's the same sort of dichotomy that they forced voters to choose between on April 7th. Do you want to engage and exercise your right to vote, or do you want to stay safe at home? Now your choice is, do you want to work and be able to sustain and provide for your family, or do you want to stay safe at home? It's the same thing that they're forcing folks to choose between again. And it's a terrible way to treat the folks that elected us to represent them and to be their voice. It's something that the Republicans, this is what they want. And the governor spoke with the leadership, the Republican majority leadership this morning, and they basically expressed that they were very pleased with the decision and the outcome, and they were in no hurry to promulgate any new rules because it is what they really wanted, was the regional approach that everybody can, decide what they want to do in their areas, and that businesses can, follow whatever sort of things they believe are necessary to stay open. My biggest concern when they presented this plan was obviously consumer protections, labor protections, and their plan does not include anything regarding testing or contact tracing. So how are we going to how is this a plan to address a pandemic that doesn't include anything regarding health and science?
Judge Colon, you wanted to say something? Jump in.
If you look at New York's plan, Governor Cuomo, he has different regions. So the fact that there are different regions it's nothing abhorrent. I mean, we can adapt that. Right. Essentially, what you have is a criteria that's statewide, under which everybody can gauge how safe it is for them to go back to work, and it's guided by science. And by science, we mean what is the number of cases, what is the number of people being treated, and how many beds do we have, and so forth. So it's really a clear indication as to how we get safer. Now, my point simply is this. Now, the governor just last week said, well, I'm going to open certain stores for a limited period to 4 or 5 customers in certain storefronts. So it appears that the Supreme Court lives in a place where you and I don't live. Because if it was that our governor was in fact saying, well, no, being in your living room is not enough. You have to be in your basement. And if I see you outside of your basement, I'm going to arrest you. Then we're clearly going into a regime that's dictatorial. But the fact is that every intention by the governor and by the Secretary of Health is to open the state in a rational manner.
Yep.
And so if you look at the evidence, it suggests that they are exactly doing that. They open parks, they open the storefronts, and so to me, I think as if I were deciding such a incredibly important case, I would stay in tune as to what's happening out in the street, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And by the street, I mean where we all live, right? How we all function, how we all get to work. And I think that was absent because I think they were so upset. And I want to call it upset because it comes through the pages as you read them. They're so upset with the fact that the legislature, as Professor Falone indicated, that the legislature clearly gave this power to the governor. And it was a law that they wanted to, it felt like and I, I have to respect the Supreme Court, and I do, and I respect their presidents. But sometimes it feels like the Supreme Court is the kid who wants to take the ball home from the playground because they begin to lose.
Yeah.
And,
well,
and
I think it's
Professor Falone, I'll let you go ahead and respond. But also another question arising is the action that the Supreme Court took to send it to rules in committee or the other process, that is a pathway available to the Supreme Court when they're not happy with a statute.
no.
So
No.
then is there an opportunity to challenge the road they chose to take?
No, this is a decision interpreting Wisconsin law. And so the Wisconsin Supreme Court is the final word on Wisconsin law. This is not a decision involving federal law or the United States Constitution. If it were, then maybe you could try and appeal to the United States Supreme Court. But this is the final word on the meeting of Chapter 252 on communicable diseases under the Wisconsin statutes. And what we have in Wisconsin is, and this is where, it's very simple. This issue is very simple if you keep it simple. And there was a lot of smoke being blown, as both Judge Colon and Representative Cabrera have indicated, in trying to make a simple question complicated. You have orders that are intended to protect us under a statute that gives power to the Department of Health. Now, sometimes an order telling people how to respond to shelter at home or to be quarantined in their home, sometimes orders can become too broad and they become almost like rules. And so, for example, we had some cases in New York City a few years back where New York City's health authority used their powers to issue orders that told people you can't drink sugary drinks. And the courts struck those down and said, look, this is not an appropriate order. You've crossed the line. You're making rules that govern people's lives into the future, rules that govern future factual situations. You've said there's a new rule for sugary drinks. And so they said that health authority in New York, this was in the New York highest court, they said it had crossed the line from issuing an order to respond to a specific situation, and it had issued a rule. And essentially what our state Supreme Court said yesterday is that every order by the health authorities gets treated like a rule. And it sort of said if it's statewide and it's responding to a temporary outbreak of communicable disease, it's not making rules ad infinitum into the future, it's still got to be treated like a rule. And that's just crazy. But they managed to do that. And the result is now we go through this formal rulemaking process, which if you are going to make rules to govern all future situations, then of course it's very deliberative. Things get drafted, proposed, there's consultation, there's comment periods. And so of course it's going to be a very burdensome and time.
It'll be June by the time we have the new order.
Right. You know, Tammy.
And Dr.
Smith, Dr. Smith, you wanted to add something?
I did.
Yes.
Highlights, particularly this moment, highlights how fragile our representative democracy really is. You know, when we don't have the right respect for the various roles that to be played by elected officials in various capacities, then as citizens, we obviously get very uncomfortable. It exacerbates our anxieties. And so this creates an opportunity for there to be an even more inflamed set of frustrations on the ground. You know, as you all talked about, employment issues, which exacerbates class conflict. We've had at the national level, states having to partner with one another to respond to shortages of necessary equipment to protect healthcare workers and to help folks who are struggling with the virus. And so that creates all types of what we would have normally referred to as sectional like issues from the 19th century. And so, this really exposes how fragile our ideas around democracy are when folks don't follow the broader sense of what it means to live in a representative democracy and to play your roles appropriately.
And that's an incredible point, because the Supreme Court is the most, it should be the most independent and soothing voice in a democracy. The Supreme Court is where we all look for core principles that everybody in society can apply, and we can have a meaningful democracy. So when you have a Supreme Court that has this pizza in which they all want their toppings, you can't have that principle come to light, and it's really difficult to perform my job as a circuit court judge that has to apply those laws, or a legislator who's trying to draft laws, or somebody who's merely trying to get to work and apply for their unemployment benefits. They are the grown-ups. In this constitutional scheme, they are the grown-ups. They are the legislature. Marisabel knows this. I know this. We are advocates. We argue strongly for things that other people may not want, or we seek to forge things in a really hard way. And I think that's what, there's one conservative justice who actually agreed with a minority on this, Justice Hagedorn.
Right.
And I think that comes from his experience in the legislature. The legislature was suing the governor. Marisabel knows this. I know this. I think many people in the state know this. If you have the votes in a majority in the state Senate and in the state assembly, you simply legislate.
Yep.
Right.
And you simply engage the process through your elective power, not by hiring a lawyer and pretending you're some barbershop that's, and interestingly, not one business sued the governor over the emergency order. Not one business in the whole state.
Yeah.
Not one. And
Right.
I can tell you, because I'm subject in small claims to evictions under Emergency Order 15. And I have had not one attorney, not one party, not one landlord in this whole county say, we don't agree with Emergency Order 15.
Let me sum up so folks there are so many comments. I'm seeing you all. I'm reading them all. I'm trying to pick up some themes here. So you all navigate these deep waters all the time. I want to make sure that our residents and myself understand it in very plain terms. It seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, in this struggle between the health department and the governor and the legislature, that the Supreme Court said the safer at order is done, and now counties, there's no other recourse to change it. Now counties have to decide how they're going to implement, on what spectrum of that safer order they're going to implement, and which leaves all the administrative government resources to try to figure out, if you live here and there's a safer at home order here, but you work here and there isn't, they're all going to have to figure that out, already strained and overwhelmed by where we are now. Did I capture that correctly? That's what life is for the moment?
So what's problematic about that, and this is why I mentioned the whole reason why the statewide approach was better and safer as opposed to the regional approach that we will have now, is again because the virus does not respect boundaries, and that's the thing that, for instance, yesterday, because of the confusion, some places, businesses, bars opened immediately.
Right.
And I was watching the news, and there was a bar in West Dallas, and they were interviewing folks that were there, and there was a nurse there, in a crowded bar. No social distancing, no face mask, nothing. And so I'm like, well, that's problematic to me. You're a nurse and you're in this area. That's she said she had no concern about spreading the virus, which that not only is that risky because you're a healthcare worker, but now you're also kind of spreading a message that the virus is no big deal.
Right.
And as a healthcare professional, people are going to take that as meaning something more, you know. And so I did a little investigating. Turns out that she actually works at a hospital here in Milwaukee. So you live in West Dallas and you're out there gallivanting, but you work here at a hospital in the COVID ICU unit, which means you're in constant contact with positive patients. So there's a risk in both directions there.
And how does that get implemented then? If we have a safer order here in Milwaukee and someone is working here, like, do people who are from outside the county now get tested in order to come into Milwaukee?
No.
Well, that's a good point. And these points are interrelated in that we only have certain amount of beds and ventilators in emergency rooms. But Milwaukee can't say to somebody from Waukesha or Ozaki, you can't come into our hospital. We have to serve those people.
Right.
That's a law.
Right.
I mean, we have to serve. The hospitals have to take them in. So the idea of regionally of balkanizing this, it's not even by region. It's by municipality.
Yeah.
And as you all know, I think St. Francis is our smallest one. I think it's 7 blocks or something. I'm sorry, maybe West Milwaukee in the county.
Yeah.
And so West Milwaukee can have a completely differing order than what West Dallas may or Milwaukee may. That's the problem with this. Now, as it relates to people who are going to work, I would urge them to follow the orders as if they were still in place.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
I think that's right.
Social distancing, keep washing your hands, keep being very careful. I understand that a lot of our neighbors are hurting because they don't have any business. Mm-hmm. And this is really hurting the Latino community, really devastating it. But I would caution as you move forward into restaurants and all other services. And that's what I will do for my family. I will not behave any differently than I did yesterday, today. And tomorrow I'll behave the same as I did yesterday. That's sort of the practical consequence of this. And Marisabel and Mr. Smith have the same, have brought up, well, are you going to be forced to go to work? Yeah. And I think that's where the rub is. The rub isn't going to be people who are willing to go to work. The rub is, who are we making to go to work? And remember, this is the same party that required all meat packers to work. Mm-hmm. They made and they issued an order that if you were in the meat packing business, you could not leave work. And so some people are apparently worth more than others.
Well, that's certainly part of our history, unfortunately. We said it recently when we were together, Dr. Smith, it's 2020.
Right.
And everything changes and nothing changes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question now. Since the Supreme Court struck down Safer at Home, what happens to all the provisions passed at the state for COVID-19 and at the federal government? Are there any implications now in terms of the extra resources, unemployment, business support? Are any of those funds tied to the state Safer at Home order?
I'll have to defer to my colleague on the panel here.
Do we know, are those monies paired at all with the Safer at Home order anywhere, federal or state?
The money
or
that
local?
we received from the feds, we already received it. So it's now up to us how we use it.
I cannot hear you.
You can't hear me?
Pedro's having some technical difficulties. We'll work with that. You go on.
So the monies that we received from the federal government, that was based on the coronavirus relief package. I believe there was 3 from the federal government. We've already gotten our state portion of that. So we have it. Now it's just a matter of how are we going to disperse it? And that's already been sort of decided. So, a big chunk of it did go to the unemployment. So that's already there. It's just a matter now, our people are going to still be eligible is the problem, because it's not that the money isn't there now. The issue is, are you still eligible to receive the money? And if your employer is calling you back to work and you decide not to work, you're not going to meet the eligibility criteria anymore. And then that's the huge problem. And it's not just the workers that will suffer, because the small businesses are not equipped actually to be sustainable at these safer ways of operating. If they have to have less employees working to make sure that everybody's separated and distanced, and to make sure customers are separated and distanced, on the one hand, they have X number of employees who are going to be dealing directly with the public, but then there's the other ones that are doing all the work and behind the scenes. And so they're going to be having a higher operating cost with less revenue. So they're still not going to be helped the way the Republicans and everybody sounds like, oh, small businesses are suffering. Some of them are going to be closed permanently if we don't reopen. But the problem is that reopening is not going to solve their problems, because they can't just go right back to the way it was before the pandemic. Yeah. It's not safe. And so they're not going to be able to recuperate the way that they're trying to sell it to the public.
Yeah. So as far as you all know, there aren't any federal or state funds tied to keeping the safer at home order.
Well, let me just explain. There was never any state funds that were applied to our even Wisconsin state relief. What the risk of the COVID-19 state relief package did was basically make Wisconsin align with the requirements to receive
federal money.
We did not appropriate any money from our own budget to put towards the coronavirus relief package. That was all money that came from the feds.
Well, here's another question from a viewer, Malia, and some other folks. So, safer at home struck statewide. Safer at home in Milwaukee still in force. So, people from other counties come into Milwaukee. Does this mean that the $500 fine or imprisonment continues if people are not abiding by the Milwaukee order?
Well, I think that it should. It should. Unfortunately, there was some very loose language in the Wisconsin Supreme Court opinion that unnecessarily seemed to call into question the entire use of criminal penalties to enforce any order issued by a health authority. And I can imagine that there will be more litigation. Yeah. Anyone who is fined for violating a city or a county order would have every incentive to argue in court that because of this language in the opinion, that in fact they can't be fined at all. So there's going to be just litigation. That's what happens when you throw out a stable, uniform rule and replace it with chaos. That it just leads to litigation and people making arguments in court.
So what is enforceable if the mayor says we still have a safer at home order in Milwaukee? What is enforceable or within the residents or from visitors?
I think what the judge is saying is that basically our City of Milwaukee stay-at-home order does include within it the penalties that are up to 30 days jail, $500 fine. But the Supreme Court decision is confusing because it just randomly throws in language in there about how the criminal penalties are overreaching, even though that's actually not even the question that was before the court. So technically, that's not part of the decision, but people can, lawyers, that's what we do. We pick stuff from opinion and say, this is what they meant,
That's
So-
right.
We have a couple of minutes left here in this discussion. Let's do a 1-minute round robin of what you think the future holds, near future, in regards to this decision. Just a minute from each of you. State Representative Cabrera.
So it's going to be a longer process in the state level as far as getting anything issued. I know that they've started with the scope statement, which is the first step in the rulemaking process. That's not even going to be published Monday, and it'll probably be another 14 days before anything happens with that. But my hope is that the general public takes this virus seriously, and that we still do what is necessary to stay safe, stay home, and only travel for essential purposes and to go to work, and don't gather in large groups, and take all the precautions necessary, because it is a virus that is deadly, and it's very quick to move from one person to the next, and it's not like you can look at somebody and know
Right.
you have the virus. So you have to take whatever measures necessary to protect yourself, to protect your family and the community.
Thank you. Professor Falone,
Yes.
your thoughts.
Let's try and leave this discussion optimistic. I believe that the majority of people in the city and the state are going to voluntarily continue to follow the safer at home guidelines themselves. All the Supreme Court said is that it can't be enforced, but obviously we can all voluntarily follow it because it's good science. It'll keep us safe. I believe the majority of businesses in our state are not going to rush to reopen because they know, they've got potential legal liability if people come into their establishment and catch the coronavirus because they haven't taken proper precautions. So I think the majority of business owners are going to take the time to make sure that they know how to clean their business premises, they know how to use social distancing within their business, etc. And they're not going to reopen right away. They're going to do it in a deliberate fashion. So I'm going to be optimistic on that front. And perhaps I'll be optimistic one other way. We did have, I believe Judge Colon underscored, we had one conservative justice who broke away and joined the dissent. So it was a 4-3 decision at our state Supreme Court. We're going to replace one of the conservatives with Judge Karofsky, soon to be Justice Karofsky.
Yeah.
And if we could keep Justice Brian Hagedorn as a swing vote in future cases, the Wisconsin Supreme Court might actually be within reach of the liberals in the future. So let's hold on to that silver lining as well.
Dr. Smith, your concluding thoughts here about the near future of this situation.
I've got two thoughts. I want to echo Professor Falone's thoughts, because what history also teaches us is that through these very frightening moments, some remarkable things do happen. We have seen justices, elected officials, capitalists, a whole range of folks change course or change attitude when faced with some very serious circumstances. So I want to echo that. The other thing I want to say is we'd be remiss if we didn't emphasize just for a moment the way that race and politics collide in our state, and the way that our city, Milwaukee in particular, is at the center of those clashes. And more than ever, I'm going to stay positive too, more than ever as a city, we have to sort of embrace that. We have to embrace the fact that we have a state legislature and a state Supreme Court that, treats us in these vile kinds of ways. And we have to make sure that we stay strong as a city and do what we need to do to overcome these challenges. That is, and I've mentioned this to you before, Tammy, what I have left is the will of the people, and I believe in the will of the people.
Amen to that. We have that hope as organizers that people have seen what is some of the worst of the underbelly of people's inner fears and insecurities and greed, and that folks are going all across the spectrum, regardless of party, like we said during the election. That rings wrong. in the inner part of a soul.
Mhm.
And hopefully folks will see that the decision was not a Supreme Court analysis and interpretation of law, but it was a political action. And that will ring sour, and that people are just not going to have it from either party, from anyone in the spectrum, that they're going to say the lives and the health of people are first, and we need to make sure that the small business people who are the least protected have a way to be sustained during this time, as well as the residents. Thank you all for being with us. Judge Colon got kicked off a second time. I'm not sure what happened after I made promises we were going to be okay.
He's getting that pizza he was talking about.
But we appreciate him and you all as well. I am going to just say, I'm sure we will have a need for your presence and your wisdom again. And so we will see you hopefully with happier times, but if not, to be in the struggle together. Thank you and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Sure, folks. Thank you, folks.
I'm going to take a second now to acknowledge all of you. There's so many comments. I'm so happy you're engaging, but I want to say hello, and we'll try to get the rest of the questions answered. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with is people don't have answers to all things yet. But I believe our session today gave us a greater understanding of what took place with the decision, so that when we navigate the future, we're better equipped. Hola again, Diana Becerra, Uriel, Jerry, Lila, Lily. Let's see who else. We have Felix. So many people disappointed. We agree with you. Stacy, Wendy, Jordan. Hola, Jordan. Yes. Hola, Lily. Elsa. It is sad. Wendy. Yes, where people are the least have the least privilege are going to be dealing with the greater consequences. Paula, decision way too soon. Understanding, yes. Thank you, Marina, Enid. Afraid to go to the store. Malaya, Maricano. Good to see you all. I hope it was helpful to you. It's never enough time to dig in, but hopefully we will continue to address and try to bring you information for you, first of all, to be safe and your family to be safe, and then for our economy to be able to sustain people's just shelter and eat basic needs, and that we as a people protect our democracy stronger than we've ever have in the past, given all that has transpired. And so we ask you to join us in our efforts. If you're interested, we have positions available for work. We have resident association groups you can join. We have issue groups you can join. We have a whole civic team you can join to make sure people understand their voting rights, how to vote. This fall election is going to be critical. So let's use all our disappointment and anger to changing the status quo as it is. With that, I'd like to remind us that one of the ways we can take action during this disappointing time is this year is a census. Every 10 years, there's a census. It's critically important that you get counted for two reasons. The number in our population gives us the number of representation that we have politically. So please get counted so that we have the appropriate number of seats to represent us in government. Second, talking about the challenging financial times we're in, the census also determines what part of our federal taxes get redistributed to us. So based on our population, federal budget gets divided among states. And let's be real, that's our money. We're paying federal taxes, and then they divvy it up based on the population. So what we want is our fair share of those resources. And the way we get that, and now it's for the next 10 years. So for every person that doesn't fill out the census, it could be $16,000 to $18,000 we're missing in road repairs, in schools, in medical facilities. So we really want, this is one of the easy ways that you can take your frustration and anger and move forward. It takes 10 minutes to do the census. We have all kinds of videos and explanations to do that. And you can call our office and we'll walk you through it as well. And you can do it in so many languages. So please do that. With that, I'm going to ask for a census video to play as a form of education and inspiration for you. And I'll be back.
You know that park you wish you had and those potholes you want fixed in your street? It takes money to build and fix these, and Washington, D.C. decides who gets it through census numbers. So starting in March, participate in the census. You can do it online, phone it in, or over the mail. And nobody else will have access to your information. Everyone should take the census, even if you're undocumented. For more information, go to WeCountCensus.com.
And another piece of information about the census that maybe will inspire you. Despite all the embarrassing decisions that have been made from our state recently with the election and this safer at home order, one thing we can be proud of is in the last census, Wisconsin was the #1 state to have mail-in census surveys completed. And so let's keep some light shining from our state and for our state. We have a daily drawing for a gift certificate for those of you who participate in the forum by filling out our survey. So I'd like to bring on our communications manager to talk about that and announce our winner. A little bright, shining time in this very heavy forum today.
Hi, Community Forum. Reminding you of our daily $25 gift certificate drawing by filling out the survey located in the comments section. In the following day's forum, we'll announce the winner. It's a quick 5-question survey, and you can enter daily and win daily. Thanks for those of you who have been filling them out, and thanks for tuning in. Now let's find out who's today's winner.
Today's winner is Lourdes de Leon. Lourdes, contact SOC at our email, soc@socmilwaukee.org, to claim your certificate. I see a question from Marina. Marina, who is overseeing the COVID testing centers? The health department. If you go to our webpage, you'll see all the latest on where you can get free testing here on the South Side. Lots of ways to do that. That has been added to in the last couple of days. Thank you for being with us. Above all things, be safe. And we'd like to thank our partners that are allowing us to be with you as organizers virtually and to respond to this COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in. We hope to see you tomorrow. I want to remind you that we're working with the mayor and his schedule to get him with us here on the forum to speak with you. Also, next week we have the ACLU, and we have a special edition of the program of talking with the Benedict Center about the partnership we have with them, responding to a diversion program for women involved in street prostitution, which is a very vulnerable population, especially at this time. Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock with SOC.
Thank you to our sponsor, Wisconsin Voice, Community Development Block Grant, Neo Philanthropy State Infrastructure Fund, Mudman Board Project, Catholic Campaign for Human Development, Silver Foundation, City of Milwaukee Office of Violence Prevention, Thai Foundation, City of Milwaukee Promised Son, all the faithful individuals who support SOC through the personal donation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.